Welcome back. This is segment 3, episode 20 of HipMojo. We're going to hit the lightning round now. So, got a question for you. We'll start off. Is an old media hookup overrated?
Yeah, the background here is What's Trending, the show with Shira Lazar that got dropped by CBS because somebody, an intern, tweeted that Steve Jobs had died before Steve Jobs actually passed away. And what's happened is since they've been released by CBS, they continued doing the show and their rankings grew. I think an old media hookup is great for validation and sounds really great. We were always very proud whenever we sign a deal with like a Time Warner, Roadrunner, or like even Hulu. But those deals, as much as they're great partners, those deals tend to generate a lot less reach, sometimes even revenue, than a lot of the new media deals with less known partners. So I think it is overrated, but as a sort of, ace in your pocket for PR purposes, like your mother probably knows CBS. Does she really know YouTube? Well, she probably knows
Buys
YouTube.
you mainstream cred, right?
To some extent. But I'm not surprised that they did better. I actually give them props for having the balls, determination to keep charging ahead. A lot of people after getting dropped by CBS would probably, wake up a bit, nervous, which I'm sure they did, but they kept trekking along, and I'm not surprised. It's good to see that they're doing well. So Google renewed their Mozilla deal for 3 years. But does Mozilla really have a shot? I mean, here's the thing. Chrome is now like the number 1 or number 2 biggest. I think in the US, Chrome is number 2 after Internet Explorer. But I think globally, I saw a report that Chrome was already number 1 in many places, if not globally around the world. So if Google basically pulls that deal in 3 years and removes 99% of the funding that Mozilla Firefox gets, is Firefox dead? Does Firefox have a future is the question.
Firefox might have a future the same way Internet Explorer 6 still manages to exist somehow to this day in some manifestations. I think they're on their way to, being obsolete or irrelevant. At the end of the day, this is my conspiracy theory, that Google invested in them to kind of, get a better sense of where the browser thing was going, and it kind of gave them the insight they needed to develop Chrome. I think they want to remain in bed with Mozilla because there's still tons of Firefox users out there. Not everyone has adopted Chrome, and that means there's still this whole chunk of user data that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. I am going to bet dollars to donuts that in 3 years when the deal's up, it doesn't get renewed, and that
Microsoft's going to buy them?
Possibly. That could be interesting. I don't know, though.
Okay. Next question. We've heard a lot about bloggers versus journalists, right? Like some woman gets thrown into jail or has to pay a massive fee because she's a blogger, so she doesn't have the same rights as a journalist. Or associations, and just you've heard this theme.
It's been going on for years,
It's been going on for years, yeah. So basically, do you see there being a greater convergence and blurring of the lines next year? Or do you think that you're going to really see a difference where some bloggers are going to become like journalists, but you're going to basically, be treated as first and second class citizens?
Well, the lines I think have been continually blurring more and more for pretty much since blogging went mainstream. I think that's going to continue to blur. At the end of the day, though, if you want breaking tech news, you don't go to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you go to TechCrunch. And some of those guys used to be journalists and some haven't. And some of the ones with journalist training still employ it a lot more. Others have gotten more gossipy and more opinionated.
Okay, but to be fair, New York Times and Wall Street Journal do break a lot of tech news.
Yeah, they do.
But I know what you mean. If you're saying what they represent, traditional media, I get that.
Okay, so I think if anything's on the line here, it's actually freedom of the press or freedom of speech, because as more and more people blog, they don't have those same protections. We really got to look at reevaluating, the lexicon of freedom of the press in general and try to substantiate what falls under freedom of speech, when are you protected as a member of the press and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think they'll continue to blur.
It's funny because you took it from that angle. I'm looking at it more as, it all boils down, I think, more so is, are you basically writing for yourself, even if it's a big blog, or is there some kind of big publication? I'm writing, for all intents and purposes, the same articles, the same themes that I wrote like 3-4 years ago when it was under the WatchMojo blog, but I was the only one writing in the business blog of the company. I'm covering the same stuff, but now it's for TechCrunch and Media Post, admittedly big, well-known brands. Right. And now people are like, well, like when we have like actual business talks, some people are like, well, since you're a journalist, we want to make sure this stays off the record. And I'm like, who are you talking about? Who's the journalist? But the perception, I think, is not so much blogger versus journalist. It's more, it could be a blog that has gone on to become a massive publication. I think it just depends. Like basically, are you writing for your own dinky sort of like blogger account or WordPress account?
Or are you?
Is there a publication?
Well,
is there
I think
an
what
editor?
it is there's a lot more op-ed content now because
Yes.
of blogs. And like you said, you got the big guys like TechCrunch, or you got a dinky blogspot account. Yeah, so it's
Could have a dinky account as well, but that's another show, another day, guys.
all right. Next question. YouTube streamed 1 trillion videos. 1 trillion.
With a T.
Yeah, in 2020.
Yeah,
do you
that's
think
crazy.
they're going to keep growing like this, or do you think that they're getting close to plateauing?
Okay, I know I just said that whole thing about off the record. What I'm about to say is sort of passé now that this has been announced. But every time I run into a YouTube staffer at a conference or something, and I'm like, man, you guys are, they're like, oh, WatchMojo, great, I read your articles, whatever. I'm like, all right, we're like a little, a fly on your ass, basically, as the saying goes. And I'm like, you guys are killing it. I'm like 48 hours of content uploaded each minute. They're like, oh, man, that was like 6 months ago. Now and they throw out some crazy number. They're like, but don't tell anyone. So, they started the year, it was something like, 2 billion streams a day. And then like when I said, man, 2 billion streams a day, they're like, I think it's a 3 now. Like, don't quote me on that 3, but my point is they just keep growing. I think they will probably keep growing, and I've always said it. You could go back to one of my crazy blog posts from 2006, or 2007 realistically, and I said YouTube will be more dominant in video than Google is in search. Mark my words, it will be.
I'll agree with that.
It's just going to be the natural monopoly. However, I think they are smart to focus on quality, and even if these 100 channels are going to flop, or some will do well, some will die, some will live, I think they are going to have challenges in terms of programming. Like think of it, NBC, if their life depended on it, they couldn't take 2 shows that are going to be successful after spending $50 million in production. Google isn't just going to throw up 100 channels against the wall and they're all going to become hit shows. So I think on that front, YouTube has its work cut out for itself. But in terms of sheer volume, YouTube is going to be massive.
On the terms of quality channels, and I know Vivo was a way for the music industry to try to, get some money back. But the Vivo thing, I think, was a great way for them to launch a bunch of quality channels. Granted, it's bite-sized content, it's music videos, but if you've ever gone YouTubing for a music video and you can't find the official one, like you're getting people holding a shaky camera on their TV.
I wish they addressed that. The number of times I want to bring up a song, let's say especially if it's for one of my daughters, and I get some crappy spoofer thing.
Yeah,
I wish
really
you could
frustrating.
just. All right, question of the week. Eric from Salt Lake City. We're going to both answer this. You start off. What was the in caps? It was T cap, H cap, E cap, capital letters. What was the story in tech and media in 2011? And obviously, let's just give one each. Since
Okay. We're going to be sappy, sentimental, and predictable. I'm going to say it's the passing of Steve Jobs.
Okay. I hate to say it. I think today I read that Bulgaria erected a statue for Steve Jobs. And I mean, Bulgaria, yeah. I mean, I would say that I'm sure a lot of CEOs, inventors, founders, when Steve Jobs resigned, but especially when he passed away, I'm sure a lot of them felt like, when I pass on, people are going to care like this. And I think the clear answer is no, people won't.
Right, he had that cult personality.
That's it.
But I think he was also, he was at the helm of a huge, not just an industry leader, but an industry, trendsetter, a talisman, as we brought up earlier. And his passing got a lot of people asking a lot of questions, including ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'll say this, that I went to see a Cirque du Soleil, or as I should say, Cirque du Soleil show, and I was thinking of Guy Laliberté, the founder. No, I'm going somewhere with this. And I was thinking of how Guy Laliberté, he had the money to take his crazy troupe out to the West Coast when they started, and he's like, you might not have money to come back. And it's like, when he's launched the circus, he was like, okay, having animals is crazy. It's expensive, it's inhumane, and it doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to basically get a bunch of people and do whatever I want to do.
Treat them like we treat the animals.
No, perhaps, but he built this massive thing. And I, for some reason, I was thinking of the show and this question, because it came in that day, and I was like, it's funny, because Steve Jobs also, he didn't really listen to what a lot of critics told him to do. He stuck to his guns, and that usually is a surefire recipe to bankruptcy, insanity, and living in a box. But he pulled it off. So for me, it was more that. I don't
He
really
didn't just get away with it. He completely pulled it off.
But I want to finish off on this. An amazing blog post, and I'm going to link to it when I post it because I forgot. I just thought of this now. Was this guy who's bashing design? He's like, please drop the design thing. And he was like, even though he said this, he goes, even though I'm a designer. He's like, stop talking as a startup about design. It's so not important compared to product and need and all that. And of course, a lot of the fanboys came out, well, what about Apple? what about Apple? And he's like, well, what about Apple? Apple, when they started, they basically made computers in like, you know, in a wooden frame. They didn't care about design. It's once they had a product. It's once they did all this. So for me, a lot of like the less, and you know, the one thing I couldn't stand is how even before he passed on, everybody all of a sudden was like, we are like Apple as a company because of this, or we are like Steve Jobs. That, you know, so when I think of like the story of the year, it was like the tacky cynicism that, okay, this guy is now clearly like hot as whatever, so everybody's gonna, so it wasn't just what Steve Jobs did, it's also the machine around that.
I think design did sell a lot of Apple products, but it wasn't the design of the physical product.
It's how everything weave together. Okay, and I was thinking more of how things weave together.
I know, and I think that's why people get it. They're talking about different things when they start arguing about design in terms of Apple, because you got the interface and you got that slick MacBook Air.
So my story, like yours, I guess, is Steve Jobs. I think it was very profound. I think, like even at the office, I think everybody in every setting the next day was a bit. But I don't think it's that superficial reason of just what Steve Jobs did in terms of media, and everybody's so passionate about songs and entertainment and sharing pictures with one another. I think it was more like remove the onion layers, all the other sort of sub-tangent stories that touched on Steve Jobs' life, comeback, and passing, that you're like, you know, a lesson here or there. Okay. Next week is going to be a special show, predictions. So I don't know the format. I don't know if it's just going to be, we'll think of some format, but it'll be predictions for 2012, which is usually a guarantee that we don't know what we're talking about because like 90% of them don't pan out. But it'll be entertaining. That's that. Thank you very much. So Twitter Company of the Year, well deserved. See you next week.